Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. The documentary Imagining the Indian screens this week at both the Avalon Theater in D.C. and Cinema Arts Theaters in Fairfax, Virginia. I spoke to co-director Aviva Kempner and writer-producer Kevin Blackistone for a second time to chart their progress since the Washington football team changed its name.
Aviva Kempner, co-director, co-producer.
Kevin Blackistone, co-producer, co-writer.
And it's great catching up with you both again. We're talking about the documentary Imagining the Indian. We spoke back when you all helped force the name change of the Washington football team to the Commanders. But now we're catching up again because it's going to open here in the D.C. area at the Avalon Theater, right in Chevy Chase, D.C. there.
Well, actually, as you know, the Avalon is 100 years this year. And the fact of the matter that the old name of the Washington football team and 3 more professional teams and 2,000 other teams are like 100 years old in terms of how demeaning the names are. So, Kevin, do you want to talk about how this project came about?
We started this project with Sam Bardley, who made the 30 for 30 doc on Len Bias, and his friend Colin McIver, who also worked on that. Started this back in 2014, and since 2014, the Washington football team has changed its name. The Cleveland baseball team has changed its name. And so there has been change along the way. And I can't take credit for it. That's not necessarily exactly how or why we started the project, but I will say this, that there has been, an increasing groundswell of support on the streets and among fans, and more allyship with Native people, recognizing the deleterious effects of these names and images. And that is what has really brought the pressure to bear upon teams like the Washington football team and its sponsors like FedEx, which really put its foot down and said, either you change the name or we're out.
Well, we have to remember that especially Suzanne Harjo, who had led the charge for decades to change the name. And remember that Dan Schneider said, never. Well, that didn't hold true, both with the Black Lives Movement and a lot of the Native involvement with their allies. There was also a local group rebrand. And it's really exciting to see how the name was changed here. As Kevin said, Fed Express said, we can't have this name anymore. Now this kind of fight is going on in Kansas City to change the Chiefs' name. And the most egregious in baseball is, of course, Atlanta and the Chop, which I'll be there for opening day like I always am because I'm the big baseball fan. As Kevin Gover says in the film, Native Americans do not do the Chop. It's a whole made-up thing. For me, it reminds me of like a Hitler rally, and that's just got to change. And we're going to be in Atlanta in 3 weeks, showing the film and hoping to build support for a local movement to also change the name there.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought up, opening day with the Nats, or opening weekend. It really reminds you that in DC, hopefully no one in DC will be doing the Chop, but if it was in Atlanta, that whole stadium will be doing it, just like the whole stadium does it with every time the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl. It's almost like a cognitive dissonance that the league officials across these different leagues and fans and broadcasters and journalists and TV networks, there's this weird dichotomy where they, on the one hand, they celebrate the DC football team changing to Commanders and, say, okay, that's the right side of history. But then they allow this Chop to happen literally like in the next game. The Commanders will finish their game, and then we turn to the Chiefs game, and there's the tomahawk chop. Talk about how it just seems like it's like, if our fan base is going to change it, how is Kansas City allowed to keep going?
Well, this is an educational process. As I point out in the film, I came up in a very progressive household, which happened to hold season tickets to the Washington football team for forever. But this was never really an issue. And I didn't think about it until the 1990s, and really began to study it, and really began to understand a connection between Black folks and what we feel is a misappropriation of our culture in greater society, and what Native people feel is a misappropriation of their culture in greater society. And it wasn't until then that I really began to step back, and I grew a sensitivity towards the name of the team that I grew up with, as well as other teams that used names and imagery. And so while in one locale we may have come to some understanding about how derogatory these names and images are, there are other places that just have not reached that understanding. They don't have that sensitivity. They don't know the history, and so that's where we are with this film in a lot of ways, to make people understand that sort of performance in the stands by fans is really mocking Native culture and Native people. And it's not until they understand that and are willing to open their eyes and look at the history and see what it is that they're doing, and understand that the hurt that it levels upon Native people, until then, they're not going to change. And you would hope that the leagues would take some ownership of this, and they really haven't. And so it's a real struggle. It's not something that's going to change overnight, as Aviva pointed out. Suzanne Shone-Harjo has been at this since the early 1970s, and there are Native people before her who have been fighting it since the 1940s. So this is not an easy fight. It's taken a long time, and I assume it's going to take even longer.
We have a couple of psychologists in the film that makes a direct correlation between these demeaning mascots and things that go on the field, and really affects the emotional and psychological profiles of young Native Americans or older ones. I mean, we're really talking about the negative effect it has on Native people. And one thing that's really rewarding for us when people come out of the movie is say, we learned so much, we didn't realize how demeaning this was. And not only do we have Kevin talking about how he realized it, we have a very respected Congressman Jamie Raskin, we have Congresswoman Eleanor Norton, we have former council member David Grasso, who all came to realize how demeaning this can be. And then we have stories of people like in Cooperstown, a young student, Emily Greenberg, who in meeting with young Navajos realized that she had to go back to her community and change. So the film both educates as well as tell people what they can do. And most importantly, we're very proud that we got the support of 2 tribes, casino tribes in California, because they already have been leading the way. They've done commercials, Yocho Dia and San Manuel, to say, hey, stop this mascotting. It hurts our kids every time we watch it, and we don't want that, to happen. And I think both Kevin and I who have always made films about anti-Semitism or countering negative stereotypes about Jews, and Kevin about Blacks, we realized, in working with Ben West, who is Cheyenne himself, that we together we have to counter this, and we're hoping that people come out and they'll do something, because there are still 2,000 high school and junior high names besides these other teams. And when it comes to baseball, and I'm so appreciative that we got a team back here in Washington, they're changing the rules. I personally don't like the rules, but it seems to me that could easily say, and there shouldn't be racist names anymore. So I concur with Kevin that there should be some leadership in terms of MLB in saying, Atlanta, You just got to change your ways.
So yeah, I just want to clarify. So it's not just, tomahawk chops and stuff like that, or mascots. It is like it's the actual names of braves and, chiefs and things like that. That the film is fighting to change those as well, right? I just want to make sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Kevin, educate folks on why those names are also deemed offensive. Because I guess in this town the name was literally red, a color, and then a person's skin. Like that was probably the most egregious, that you could imagine. So obviously that had to change. Cleveland Indians, Native Americans, what they're actually called. Columbus was wrong; they weren't even from India. So you get why that's changed. So now educate, as we move down the line of this, why Braves, Chiefs, address the devil's advocates that will say, well, it's a name of pride.
It's insulting for a majority of people in this country who either whose forefathers were either out to eradicate or remove Native people from this land, which was theirs, to then make a decision to use their likeness, what they believe to be their names, and their culture to name sports teams or to name consumer products, to use them in any other way, right? That's not their choice to make. Number one, I mean that's when you talk about white supremacy, that's white supremacy 101. No one ever asked these people, Native people, indigenous people, if this was okay with them. And now that they have spoken out for so long to say that this is not okay with them, then we should give them that space. We should give them an ear. They are far more than the monolithic images created by the Europeans who arrived on these shores than that which is depicted in commercialism, and particularly and most noticeably in sports. And so that's why this is a big issue, because it's a lie. It's not, it's not true, and it's very demeaning. Think about any other culture, any other race, any other ethnic group that would have its culture appropriated, I should say misappropriated, by a dominant culture to use any which way it chooses. No one would accept that. People would not accept that. And so that's why this is highly problematic. And also I'll just point out, I thought, we didn't interview Keith Ellison, but we have a clip of Keith Ellison at a rally, the former congressman from Minnesota who happens to be Muslim. But he points out that this is the sort of thing that is a door to racism, which is really one of my attractions to doing this film, because I'm always interested in like how racism started, right? What's the seed? And the seed on this continent is the arrival of Europeans and their attempt to erase Native people and their culture from this continent. That is the beginning. And then enslaved Africans came along after that, who, by the way, came along to replace the labor of Native Americans that was harnessed by Europeans upon their first arrival here.
Yeah.
And as a filmmaker, I'm also very sensitive to the fact that Hollywood, more than any other field, has also, even more than sports, has contributed to the negative and not truthful portrayal of Native Americans. I mean, you can go to any kind of these films, the whole Tonto, just time and time again, we show cartoons where, Native Americans or indigenous people are subject to being killed or mocked. And it's something that, again, is very hurtful to Native American youth, that we really can make a difference if we get rid of these negative mascoting to the mental health of young indigenous people in this country and other countries. And what's really wonderful that we're finding when people come out of the movie, and we're going to have we'll have a list of the things the kind of things they can get involved in, is people just don't realize it if they're not Native American, how hurtful it is. And that's a commitment that we all have in making the film to make real change in terms of the names.
Well said, both of you. As Kevin, you're sitting there recounting the actual history, the dual seeds of where all this began. It drives me nuts when people use the phrase critical race theory as like a negative, or woke as a negative, and they're like, why are you trying to change everything? Well, it's almost like, why are you scared to learn? We're not making up an alternate history. We're peeling back these lies that have been told. And wouldn't you want to be closer to the truth of the matter, and then weave in any good history with bad history, and then bring to where we are present and try to make it better going forward? I even look back to when I spoke to both of you, what was it, in 2020, before they did the Commanders did the name change. And I even look at that to now, flash forward, not even 3 years later, and to see the R word in print now, even though back then we were saying, the R word are changing their name, and it seemed like you'd put it in your articles, but even to see it now, it's like, oh my gosh, that word, it jumps out at we wouldn't even say it now. But talk about how quickly it can be like, once you make a change, you get used to it. Talk about people that maybe are hesitant to do it, how, once you take the leap, it's really not that hard.
Well, one needs only look at what happened in Cleveland, right? The Cleveland baseball franchise changed their names to the Guardians after having after being named after indigenous people for, basically for over a century. And did it make a difference to their fan base? Absolutely not. They went out and bought the new gear. They adopted the new name, and the team had renewed success, not because of the name change, just because they're a good team. And so you can't look anywhere in this country where, or even in Canada, where a team has realized the error of its ways and erased indigenous names and imagery and performance from their franchise, and not continued on, and not lost any of its fans. And people, they may not forget about it, but they move on, because that's really not what it's about. It's about the community around your team, the team you love to root for, to beat another city's team, to cheer on those athletes. It really has made absolutely no difference. And you even look in this city, people may not like the name of the new name that the team has chosen, the Commanders, but they're not walking away from the franchise because of it. They're just as engaged and just as angry about the lack of success that the team has had for 20 years as they've ever been. And so it's, at the end of the day, another name is just a name, and another name is just a way to rally around a team.
Someone wrote, we had a nice review of the film in the New York Daily News, and he had a great line. It's not, we're saying, don't love your team, just change the name. We're all sports fans who made the movie, and what we're trying to say is, do not be on the backs of demeaning Native Americans by keeping some archaic names. We have to make progress about being kind to our history, to know our history, but more importantly, not to offend people by calling, these insidious mascots and names.
Well, The fight is a very timely one. I mean, it's the reigning Super Bowl champions, and the baseball team that play the Nats on opening day. So, it's right in front of us, folks. So if you want to sort of catch the zeitgeist of a very important social issue, head over to the Avalon on April 7th and check out Imagining the Indian. I guess just
Can I mention one more thing about a name?
Go
I think
ahead, go ahead.
another thing, anyone who lives in Washington, the reason we're called the Nats and not the Senators is we don't have statehood. So I'm hoping the name change I'm working on, and the film is dedicated to it, is statehood, so that one day we can go back to our original name of the Senators.
Oh, wow. That would be cool to go back to all the people that remember the Senators to root for the old name. Talk about a name change.
That would be real progress.
Well, yeah, that if now we're transcending sports and talking about, actually having, what is it, taxation with representation. But anyway, cool. Yeah. Well, so where do I want to end with, just in terms of the film as a film and, the rollout here. So it's going to play Avalon April 7th. And then where does it go from there? Is it nationwide?
They should check the Avalon schedule. There's all kinds of events. We're also going to be in Virginia at Cinema Arts. And Rhonda Lovato, who's leading the fight in Kansas City, is going to join us the weekend after next, so people can know a lot more about the fight that's going on, because it really is very parallel, don't you think, Kevin, to what we went through here in Washington? And then after that, we're in Atlanta, Los Angeles, Chicago, Kansas City, Phoenix, and lo and behold, Columbus, Ohio just booked us, which haven't gone to Michigan. That's curious to me, but if they're interested, let them show it. The whole thing is to educate people on why these names are so insidious and why change is necessary.
Well, I appreciate you both joining us, and we invite everyone to go back and check out, our other conversations in the archives from a couple years ago too, just to sort of see how fast this thing moved. From a journalistic standpoint, it's fascinating to me to see how the cultural conversation can shift so quickly, and maybe 3 years from now we'll be having a whole new ball game, up, no pun intended, about Chiefs and Braves and the rest. Hey, thanks so much, both of you, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Our theme music is Scott Buckley's Clarion. Remember to give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.